For our next section, we're going to be working with colored pencils. And so again, before I get started, I'm just going to go ahead and lift any of the graphite that came from my homemade transfer paper. And this side ended up a lot lighter from my transfer, so I don't need to do as much work with lightening it up. This step is even more important when working with the colored pencils versus the graphite pencils, because the colored pencils will mix with the graphite, and so you don't want that graphite muddying the colors that you've chosen, especially when we're working with things like yellows here. All right, so again, I have a piece of tracing paper down just to cover up the bottom so I'm not smudging anything that I've already drawn. And I've selected a couple different colors here. I tried to stick with the main colors that I see in the pattern of the butterfly, but you can always choose some more later. So similar to what we did on this side, I'm going to start with my darkest darks and work from there. So right now I have PC935. This is just a black colored pencil. And so I'm just following the steps that I did before, finding anything that looks black and coloring it in. This is sort of a level up from working with just black and white, because now not only are we thinking about the tone of everything, but now we're incorporating colors also. And colored pencils behave more like a B pencil. They're softer than, say, an H pencil. So you'll probably need to sharpen them more if you want them to get into the little thin spots. So towards this outer tip of the wing, it does get a bit lighter, so I'm pressing down lighter with my black pencil, and I will be incorporating some color on top of that. It won't just be solid black. There are lots of little variations in here. I see some orange, I see some yellow. So here, because my pencil is still really nice and sharp, I'm going around and outlining everything first before I get right into doing the color. That way I don't have to sharpen my pencil as much down the line. And when I get up to these edges, like going over these lines that I've created, right now I'm just freehanding them, trying to draw as closely to the line as I can, but if you prefer, you can put down a ruler or tape a piece of paper down, that way you don't accidentally go over the line, just to make it really nice and straight. Or you could also use some masking tape. And even though I'm mostly coloring things in right now because I've already traced my image onto my final paper, I'm also glancing up at my reference photo as I do this just to make sure things match up properly. Just in case there's something I didn't draw on the paper the first time, or maybe a shape is slightly different. So right now, this big space that I'm coloring in, I'm making strokes that go downwards just because it follows the contour of the shape. But I also want to go across like this. That way I can mimic the other side and then also follow the natural blur of that shape on the butterfly. This part gets a little bit fuzzy because I'm going right up to the line where I have my dark pencil marks. So it's harder to see here because it looks so similar to my black pencil. Now I've blocked in most of my bigger shapes, and the few black things remaining on the page, from the looks of it, are some thicker veins. But because those are fine lines, I'm not going to add them with the black quite yet, because if I do that, it'll be harder to put lighter colors down like the yellow, because then I'll have to move around the lines so that they don't mix together. I'm going to put the yellow down first, and then I'll come back to the black again and then do some of the finer lines. So now I'm going to switch to my PC916. This is a canary yellow. And aside from the black, I feel like this yellow is the most dominant color of this swallowtail butterfly. So I'm going in pretty lightly at first, because there are some sections that are lighter and then there are some that are darker. And I want to make sure that I'm not going too dark from the very beginning. I can always build up, but it's harder to take away. And I'm being cautious around the edge of that black because I don't necessarily want them to blend quite yet. So now all of my yellow is down, and now I can establish which places are darker yellow versus which places are the highlights. So it looks like this area right around here is lighter, and closer towards the body of the butterfly is where it's darker. And even though this looks like mostly a yellow butterfly, it's not pure canary yellow like this, so I am going to mix in some other colors. So here I have PC946, this is dark brown, and even the parts on the butterfly that are black, they don't look pure black, they're still on the warmer side, I would say. So I'm going to use this brown to layer over some of the black parts and make those a little bit warmer. And I'm also going to have it drip over into these yellow sections to darken up that yellow a little bit and mute it ever so slightly. I can even use this brown to do some of the veins. So I'm going to cut all the way through those big shapes. So usually these individual sections of a butterfly are the brightest or lightest right in the center. And then as they get near a vein or a darker pattern, they sort of fade into that darkness. So I'm only adding brown around the edges. I'm not really adding them to the center of any individual shape. And by putting this layer of brown on top of this black, it'll also darken up that area, because the more layers of the colored pencil you have, the darker it'll get. And right now, not only am I using my original reference image, but I'm also using the opposite side of my butterfly as a reference, just to make sure anything I drew on this side, it looks fairly symmetrical on the other side as well. Which is helpful because a lot of the time with these more complex shapes, you can get lost in the different lines and shapes. I'm also adding some light brown over here. That way I can warm up this section. I want to make it a little warmer, but I also don't want to make it too dark. So I'm also going to switch over to PC916. This is an orange pencil. And kind of the same thing. I'm using this orange to warm up this space. And I might even use some of this orange on some other sections of the wings as well, just to make it a little more cohesive. Switching back to my yellow, fill in some of these shapes that I forgot to before. Now I'm taking out my PC903. This is true blue. There's not a whole lot of blue in this upper quadrant of the wing, but there's certainly a lot of blue that we'll be using in the marker and the water-soluble pencils. So on this upper half of the wing, this is where it sort of fades out. So the blue does not pack the same punch that it will on the bottom. Now I'm going back to my black, very, very lightly so that I can get a nice fine line. I'm tracing over the antenna on this side to get it to match my left side. And now I'm going back in, sort of tracing over some of the brown lines and making more veins. And it really doesn't take a lot of pressure with the black pencil to make a shift in that color. So I don't want to apply too much pressure because I don't want to overwhelm the yellow especially. And I'm approaching the finish with these colored pencils, and I can always come back into the colored pencil later on when I'm doing the final details on all 4 sections together at once. But I think this is looking good. All right, now it's time for another section. I'm going to move on to the marker section next.